The cabin lights flickered softly as passengers boarded the Skybridge Airlines, Flight 1786 from Dallas to Washington, D.C. Most were business travelers, some families heading home, and one woman walking with quiet dignity down the aisle drew the attention of many, not because she was flashy or loud, but because of her uniform. Staff Sergeant Serena Jackson, a 32-year-old black female soldier, wore her full U.S. Army camouflage with medals glinting softly on her chest and a name tag that read Jackson. She had just returned home from her second deployment in the Middle East. After 12 months overseas, months of blistering heat, sandstorms, danger, and sacrifice, this flight marked her transition from soldier to civilian again. All she wanted was a few hours of peace before hugging her mother back home. But peace wasn't what she was about to receive. The moment she stepped into the cabin, a few passengers clapped. A child whispered, "She's a real soldier, Mommy." Serena smiled politely and nodded as she wheeled her military-issued backpack to her assigned seat in row 3A first class. The ticket had been gifted to her by a nonprofit organization supporting returning veterans. It was one of the few times in her life someone had offered her comfort without asking for anything in return. As she reached her row, a flight attendant named Amanda, blonde, early 40s, with a pristine bun and stiff posture, turned sharply from the galley. Her eyes narrowed when she spotted Serena. There was a pause, brief but sharp, before Amanda stepped in front of her path. "Excuse me," Serena said politely. "That's my seat 3A. Amanda looked her up and down. "Ma'am, are you sure?" she asked, a tight smile on her lips. "This is a first-class section." "Yes," Serena said evenly, pulling out her boarding pass. "It's right here." Amanda leaned in closer than necessary, her tone low but cutting. "We don't usually see uniforms in this section." Serena blinked. "Excuse me, I'm just saying." Amanda continued, glancing around at the other first-class passengers, many of whom were now watching the scene unfold. "People like you usually sit toward the back. Maybe you meant 13A. That last part wasn't just condescending, it was degrading." Serena's eyes didn't flinch. "I've been assigned 3A, I double-checked." As Serena moved to place her bag in the overhead compartment, Amanda took a step closer and, whether by design or impatience, used her arm to press Serena back by the shoulder. The move was subtle but unmistakable, a physical shove. Gasps were audible from 2 rows behind. "Hey, that wasn't necessary," a male passenger called out. Serena's military instincts told her not to escalate. Her eyes locked on Amanda. "You just touched me," she said firmly. Amanda crossed her arms. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay calm. You're being disruptive in a premium section of the plane." That was the moment the cabin seemed to freeze. Serena slowly reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and made one call. "Uncle Mark," she said, her voice calm but heavy with warning. "I'm on Skybridge 1786. No, everything's okay. Just a bit of a situation. Yeah, I'm in seat 3A. Apparently it's controversial." She ended the call without another word. Amanda scoffed. "Calling someone isn't going to change your seat." "You're right," Serena said. "But it might change yours." And she sat down. Passengers around her murmured in disbelief. Some whispered in support. Others stayed silent, but the energy in the cabin had shifted. Amanda looked shaken for the first time. She retreated toward the galley, clutching a tablet, typing furiously, probably trying to write an incident report before it became her downfall. Serena leaned back in her seat, composed. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to fight. She had fought enough for her country. But this time someone else was about to fight for her. Serena sat in seat 3A with her back straight, her boots firmly planted on the floor and her eyes fixed ahead. The faint hum of the plane's air conditioning and the occasional shuffle of boarding passengers were the only sounds that filled the space. But around her the atmosphere had changed, like air thickening before a storm. A middle-aged man across the aisle shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His laptop rested on the tray table, but he hadn't touched it since the confrontation. 2 rows back, a teenage girl stopped scrolling through her phone. Even a toddler being strapped in by his mother had gone quiet, sensing something unusual. Serena was used to being watched. Overseas, she'd patrolled dangerous terrain, with nothing but instinct and training keeping her alive. But this was different. These weren't enemies. These were civilians, fellow Americans watching her, not with admiration, but with hesitancy. Some looked at her with guilt, others with suspicion, and a few, like the woman in 4C diamond earrings, sharp sunglasses tucked into her blouse, looked at her with contempt, thinly veiled behind polite disinterest. Amanda hadn't returned yet, but Serena knew she would. As the boarding announcements continued, Serena opened her backpack, slowly taking out a small book, Letters to Home, a compilation of real letters written by American soldiers throughout history. The edges of the pages were worn, and a ribbon marked her favorite letter from a World War II nurse. But before she could read a line, Amanda reappeared. This time her posture was tighter. No longer the casual control of a veteran flight attendant, her cheeks were flushed. She held a silver tray with a pre-flight drink offered to first-class passengers. She stopped by Serena's row, set down the drink with a forced smile. "Can I get you something else, ma'am?" she asked too loudly. Serena blinked at her. "No, thank you." Amanda leaned in slightly. "I just wanted to clear up any misunderstanding earlier." Serena didn't flinch. "The one where you shoved me or the one where you questioned whether I belonged here?" Amanda's fake smile faltered. "I didn't mean anything by it. It's protocol security measures. I didn't realize." "I was in uniform," Serena said, voice low. "You realized." Amanda hesitated, then turned away, her composure unraveling by the second. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be closing the cabin doors in 5 minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts." Amanda walked briskly toward the cockpit. Meanwhile, Serena pulled out her phone again, not to make another call, but to check the time. It had been exactly 8 minutes since her call to Uncle Mark. She remembered what he said the day he pinned her with her last medal. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you have to fight every battle. Sometimes you just make the right call and let the world respond." She took a slow breath. This time the world was already responding. The cabin door had almost shut when it suddenly reopened. 3 people stepped aboard. 2 were uniformed Federal aviation officials. The third was a tall man in a charcoal suit with silver streaks in his hair and sharp assessing eyes, Major General Mark Holloway, her uncle. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Amanda turned from the cockpit and froze. "Sir, is there a problem?" General Holloway didn't answer her. He looked directly at Serena. "Sergeant Jackson," he said, voice calm but firm. "Would you be willing to join me for a moment?" Serena nodded, stood, and the entire cabin watched as the two walked a few steps toward the front galley. Amanda hovered nervously nearby. "General, I..." He raised one hand. "Not now." Inside the galley, the general spoke in a low tone only Serena could hear. "Do you want to press this formally?" Serena looked over at Amanda, who was fidgeting with her scarf, then glanced back at the curious passengers. "No," she said, "but I want it addressed." He nodded once. "It will be." Then he turned around and spoke loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. "This flight has been grounded for personnel review. Passengers will be asked to deboard in an orderly fashion. We apologize for the delay." Gasps erupted again. Amanda's eyes widened. "Sir, wait. That's not necessary. You laid hands on a decorated soldier," General Holloway said, eyes cold. "And you questioned her presence in first class based on her appearance. This isn't about protocol. It's about respect." The door to the cabin was reopened. Airport security stood ready. Serena walked back to her seat, collected her bag without a word, and calmly exited the plane, dignity intact. She didn't yell. She didn't demand revenge. She didn't post anything. But the silence she left behind was louder than any viral video. In Amanda's career, it was about to take a sharp nosedive. As Serena sat quietly in the small waiting lounge near gate C-27, her backpack by her feet and her hands clasped in her lap, the gravity of what had just happened began to settle in, not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed it. She could hear murmurs from nearby passengers who had also been removed from the flight when it was grounded. Some were annoyed, others confused. But a few, especially those who had seen the interaction firsthand, were slowly beginning to piece together the reason behind the disruption. She didn't look for their validation. She had never needed it. A young black woman in uniform doesn't survive 2 tours in a combat zone by seeking the approval of strangers. But that didn't mean their silence didn't sting. As Serena took a sip of lukewarm airport coffee, her thoughts drifted to moments from the war times when she'd stared down danger, when she'd carried wounded comrades to safety under gunfire, when she'd written goodbye letters just in case. None of those moments made her feel as invisible as being dismissed on her own country's soil in the front cabin of a plane, and yet she hadn't lost control. She hadn't screamed, threatened, or retaliated. She had done what every soldier is taught to do: assess, act, and escalate through the right channels. Her uncle, General Holloway, now sat beside her, watching the crowds move past the glass wall of the terminal. His presence was calming, but also reflective of something deeper. His frustration simmered just beneath the surface. "She's not the first," he finally said, breaking the silence. "I know," Serena replied. "She probably won't be the last." "I know that too." He turned to her, his expression serious. But this isn't going to be swept under some rug. She nodded. I don't want revenge, Uncle Mark. I just want people to learn. They will, he said. That's a promise. Across the terminal, Amanda, the flight attendant, stood with her supervisor and two Skybridge corporate officials. Her body language had shifted from defensive to desperate. Her arms waved as she tried to explain herself, then fell to her sides when her words seemed to have no effect. The uniformed FAA officer, who had accompanied General Holloway earlier, now stood beside Amanda, taking notes on a clipboard. Serena watched the scene but didn't feel joy. She didn't want someone's life destroyed, but consequences had to matter. Because if someone could push a soldier in front of a cabin full of people and walk away with only an apology, what did that say about the country she fought for? Just then, a teenage boy approached her hesitantly, holding a notebook. His father hovered a few feet behind, unsure whether to intervene. Excuse me, the boy said shyly. Are you a real soldier? Serena smiled. Yes, I am. The boy lit up. My big brother wants to join the army. He says people like you are heroes. Serena blinked, her heart catching for a second. Tell him. It's not always easy, but it's worth it. The boy nodded, then asked, Can I shake your hand? She reached out and shook his hand firm and warm. His fingers were small, but his grip was full of admiration. Thank you for your service, he whispered. Thank you for saying that, she replied. After he left, her uncle leaned back in his chair. That, he said softly, is why you do what you do. 20 minutes later, a Skybridge executive named Lorraine Kelly, mid-50s, tailored suit, crisp walk, approached Serena with an apologetic tone. Staff Sergeant Jackson, she began on behalf of Skybridge Airlines. I want to express our deepest regret for what happened to you today. Serena looked her in the eyes. Are you sorry it happened, or are you sorry you got caught? There was a pause. Lorraine swallowed. Both, she said honestly. Serena nodded. Then what's next? Lorraine straightened. The employee involved is being suspended pending formal investigation. You will receive a written apology, but more importantly, we will begin retraining our flight staff on how to interact with military personnel and how to address unconscious bias. That's a start, Serena said. We'd also like to offer you a full refund and complimentary travel for a year. Serena shook her head. Use that money for something better. Start a program for hiring veterans into your airline, or fund a mentorship program for women of color who want to work in aviation. Lorraine blinked, surprised. That can be arranged? Good, Serena said. As the executive walked away, Serena felt no triumph, just resolve. She hadn't asked to be a symbol, but life had a way of making you one when you least expected it. She glanced again at the other passengers still lingering around the gate, some pretending not to look, others glancing with curiosity. A few gave small nods of support. One woman mouthed, I'm sorry. Serena offered a nod in return. Then she stood up, slung her backpack over her shoulder, and walked toward the new gate where she'd been rebooked. This time no one stopped her. No one questioned her seat. She was just a soldier going home. But now the world knew her name. And Amanda, she would soon learn the weight of underestimating dignity in uniform. The story didn't end at the airport. Later that evening, Serena sat alone in her hotel room near the Capitol. She hadn't gone home right away. She needed space time to process. The TV was unmuted, and her military duffel bag sat unopened by the door. She was still in uniform, staring at her phone. Dozens of messages had come in from people she hadn't spoken to in years old. Unit mates, childhood friends, mentors from ROTC. But one message caught her eye. It was a text from a woman named Tanya Wilkes, a well-known journalist and advocate for veterans' rights. Tanya, I heard what happened today. You didn't raise your voice, but the whole country heard you. I'd like to talk. Serena wasn't sure why, but she replied, Serena, I didn't do anything special. I just didn't back down. Tanya, exactly. By morning, the story had broken. A video secretly recorded by a nearby passenger had surfaced online. It captured the exact moment Amanda put her hand on Serena and said the now infamous line, people like you don't usually sit up here. The video spread like wildfire. News outlets, Twitter threads, veteran groups, and civil rights organizations. Skybridge Airlines was trending for all the wrong reasons. The title that headlined most articles, Decorated Black Soldier, Humiliated on First-Class Flight, Airline Grounds Plane After One Call. Serena's phone rang nonstop. Requests for interviews, public statements. Reactions ranged from outrage to heartbreak to deep national introspection. But Serena stayed quiet until one call came in that she couldn't ignore, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs himself. Sergeant Jackson, the voice said respectfully, You've become a symbol for a much bigger conversation. Race, respect, military dignity. I'd like to formally invite you to speak next week at the Veterans Leadership Forum. I'm not a politician, Serena replied. You're not supposed to be. You're a soldier, and that's exactly why you should speak. She hesitated, then agreed. A few days later, Serena stood in front of a podium in a room filled with decorated veterans, military brass politicians, and young cadets. Her uniform was pressed, her medals gleamed, but her voice was what silenced the room. I didn't ask to be in the spotlight, she began. I didn't want headlines. I just wanted a seat I had earned without question, without judgment. The way I was treated that day wasn't new. It wasn't shocking to many people who look like me, but it should be. She looked around the room, locking eyes with both generals and teenagers. When someone puts on this uniform, they aren't just representing a branch of service. They're giving up time, comfort, safety, and sometimes their lives. The least they should expect in return is respect, not for what they look like, but for what they've given. The room erupted in a standing ovation. From that day forward, Skybridge Airlines became one of the first U.S. carriers to launch a formal veteran and diversity training initiative, written in part by Serena herself. Amanda, the flight attendant, was terminated. But more than that, her case sparked national conversations about bias in customer service discrimination in uniform and the silent burden carried by Black service members. A month later, Serena finally returned home. Her mother greeted her at the door with tears and open arms. Her younger cousin had printed her speech and framed it. The local mayor declared that day Sergeant Serena Jackson Day. But for Serena, the true victory was quieter. It came in the form of an envelope delivered by hand a week later. Inside was a simple note from a young girl in JROTC. Dear Sergeant Jackson, I saw your video. I'm Black too. I thought maybe I wasn't strong enough to join the Army, but now I know strength looks like you. I won't let anyone tell me I don't belong. Nia, age 16. Serena placed the letter in her journal. She didn't respond publicly. She didn't need to. Because one push, one call, and one soldier's quiet strength had moved an entire nation. 3 weeks had passed since the day Serena Jackson's name flooded headlines across the country. 3 weeks since Skybridge Airlines was forced to ground a flight after a single phone call from a calm, unshaken soldier in a seat she had every right to occupy. 3 weeks since millions watched the video of a flight attendant placing her hand on the shoulder of a decorated U.S. Army sergeant and telling her without shame or hesitation that people like you didn't belong in first class. The world had reacted with fire, but Amanda never said a word. No public apology, no interview, no statement of remorse. She had disappeared, suspended by the airline, her name redacted in official documents, her social media accounts wiped clean. And yet for Serena, the silence was louder than any press release. It was early morning in Washington, D.C., and the city was just beginning to stir. Serena walked through the National Mall alone in jeans and a black jacket. No uniform, no ribbons, no spotlight, just her and the biting winter air. She paused in front of the World War II memorial, her eyes scanning the names etched in stone. She wasn't old enough to remember the wars of the past, but she had fought her own. And not all of them were overseas. As she stood there, a man approached her, slowly, tall, white hair, military posture, even in civilian clothes. Sergeant Jackson, he asked. She turned cautious but polite. Yes. General Whitaker, he said, offering a handshake. Retired. I served with your uncle in Germany. He speaks very highly of you. Serena nodded, shaking his hand. It's an honor, sir. I came to say thank you, he said. Not just for what you did in uniform, but for how you carried yourself off that plane. That kind of strength. It reminded me of something we've lost. Serena gave a small smile. I didn't plan to be an example. That's usually when the best examples happen. They talked for a few minutes about war legacy and the weight of quiet resistance. When he left, Serena stared once more at the monument before her, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded note. It was the letter from the JROTC student, Nia, age 16. She carried it everywhere now. Later that day, back at her apartment, she received a call from a restricted number. Her instincts told her not to answer, but something nudged her. Hello? There was a pause on the other end, then a breath. I reached Dararn, Serena. She froze. She knew the voice immediately. The careful cadence, the clipped tone. It was Amanda. I'm not supposed to be calling, Amanda said quickly. Skybridge Legal told me to stay quiet, that anything I say could be used in the ongoing reviews, but Serena waited. I saw your speech, Amanda said, at the forum. Silence. I didn't know you were. I mean, I should have treated you better. I wasn't thinking. I was just doing my job, and you were doing your job when you shoved me, Serena asked, her voice calm. Amanda exhaled. No, I was angry. I was stressed. And I assumed wrongly. I know that now. Serena sat down. Her heart didn't race. Her fingers didn't tremble. She had faced insurgents with IEDs. One awkward phone call couldn't shake her. I didn't call for you to lose your job, Serena said. I called because you crossed a line, and I wanted someone to hold it accountable. I know, Amanda whispered. And you're right. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted to say it to your face, or as close as I can. Another long pause. I'm sorry. Serena didn't speak right away. You hurt me, she said. Not just physically, but in a way that stays with someone. You made me feel like I didn't deserve a seat I had earned with sweat and sacrifice. You didn't just disrespect me. You disrespected the uniform I wore and the country I defended. I know, Amanda whispered again. I hope, Serena continued, that one day, if you ever wear a uniform of your own, maybe not military, maybe just the badge of responsibility, you'll remember how it feels to be on the other side. Amanda was quiet, then she hung up. Serena didn't feel satisfied. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt steady. That night, as she closed her laptop and prepared for bed, she saw a news alert pop up on her screen. Flight attendant issues private apology to decorated soldier. Amid investigation fallout. The article didn't mention Serena by name, and that was fine, because this was never about fame, never about attention. It was about truth, and that truth had finally been spoken softly over a shaky phone call, but spoken nonetheless. Serena turned off the light, climbed into bed, and stared at the ceiling. The war overseas was over, and this battle maybe was finally closing too. While Serena moved on quietly, the world around her didn't. Skybridge Airlines, scrambling to recover from public outrage, had announced a sweeping internal audit and cultural retraining initiative. The press release used all the right words: zero tolerance, diversity commitment, military respect protocols, but those on the inside knew something deeper was brewing. And not everyone was on board. Miles away in a quiet office on the 9th floor of Skybridge's Manhattan headquarters, HR Director Julia Manning sat at her desk with a folder labeled Amanda Keller. Final review. She sighed, rubbed her temples, and clicked open the internal report compiled after Serena Jackson's incident. Every word had been scrubbed by the legal team, but nothing could hide the truth. Amanda had acted on bias. She had touched a passenger unnecessarily, and she had lied in her initial incident report. And yet the board was hesitant to terminate. Why? Because Amanda wasn't just any flight attendant. She was a 17-year veteran with high passenger satisfaction scores and a father who had once been an executive for the airline. People still whispered about who she knew every time her name came up in internal disciplinary meetings. Julia stared at the screen. Her inbox was flooded with messages from employee groups, veterans, Black staff members, younger flight attendants demanding accountability, demanding fairness, demanding more than polished PR. She reached for her phone. Hi, can I get a meeting with Thomas? Yes. Tell him it's about Amanda Keller. That same day, Amanda sat alone in her apartment. Gone were the navy blue blazer, the red scarf, the polished bun. She wore a hoodie and jeans now. Her eyes were puffy, not from tears, but from exhaustion, physical, emotional, reputational. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it ring. Then it buzzed again, this time a message. You're trending again. They leaked your name. From colleague. Amanda clicked the link. There it was, a viral tweet from a former crew member. I worked with Amanda Keller. What she did to that soldier was no surprise. I've seen her profile passengers for years. She once made a Black family sit at the back, even with first-class tickets. Enough is enough. Justice for Serena. It had over 200,000 likes in an hour. Amanda threw her phone onto the couch and slumped into the kitchen chair. She thought about the call she made to Serena. She had hoped it would bring her closure, maybe even forgiveness. But instead, it just made her realize how deeply wrong she had been, and how shallow her understanding had always been. She opened her laptop and started typing, not for the media, not for HR, not even for Serena, but for herself. I never thought I was racist. I still don't think I am. But that's not for me to decide, is it? The truth is, I saw a Black woman in uniform and I didn't think of honor. I thought of inconvenience. I saw her medals and still questioned her place. That moment wasn't just a mistake. It was the result of years of unchecked assumptions I never challenged. She paused, wiped a tear she didn't realize had fallen, then kept writing. Meanwhile, in the halls of the Capitol, Serena stood beside her uncle outside a committee room. She wasn't there to testify, but to listen. Congress was reviewing a bill to expand veterans' protections in public accommodations. Serena hadn't asked for policy change, but it was happening and her name was attached to it, whether she liked it or not. Inside the room, lawmakers debated. Senator Leland Harper, a Vietnam veteran, leaned forward into the microphone. When a decorated soldier is humiliated simply for sitting in the seat she was assigned, it isn't just disrespectful, it's dangerous. It sends the message that honor isn't enough, that your skin color still defines your worth. Serena clenched her fist behind her back, not because she was angry, but because she knew he was right. Later, as she exited the building, a journalist stopped her. Sergeant Jackson, do you believe Amanda Keller should have been fired? Serena paused, then answered slowly. I believe accountability matters. I also believe in growth. But growth doesn't happen without consequences. The clip went viral. That night, Skybridge board members met behind closed doors. Tension was high. Some argued that terminating Amanda would make the airline look weak to the union. Others argued that not terminating her would cost them public trust. Then came a surprise. Julia Manning entered the boardroom not with her HR folder, but with a video. She pressed play. It was a mashup of internal complaints, testimonials from passengers' flight logs showing repeated complaints about Amanda's behavior, and finally Serena's speech at the Veterans Forum. The room fell silent. Then one board member, an Air Force veteran herself, stood up and said, "We built this airline on trust. If we protect bias, we bury that trust permanently. I vote we let her go." The decision passed. Amanda Keller's employment with Skybridge Airlines was terminated effective immediately. Serena learned about it the next morning, not through the news, but through a letter, a physical envelope stamped and handwritten. Inside was a note. Serena, they let me go today. I expected to feel angry. I don't. I feel free to confront who I've been and who I want to become. I'm sorry again, not for the headlines, for the hurt. Amanda. Serena folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the same journal where she kept Nia's note. 2 letters, 2 voices, 2 versions of America. And Serena, she stood between them, unshaken, unbent, and more visible than ever. A week after Amanda's termination, in the emotional letter she sent Serena, found herself invited to speak at a high school just outside Baltimore. The request had come from a young teacher named Mr. Clarence Reese, a former Marine who now ran the school's JROTC program. He had written, "They look up to you, Sergeant Jackson. Many of these kids have never seen someone who looks like them in a uniform standing with that kind of dignity. You don't owe them a speech, but your presence would change lives." Serena was hesitant at first. She wasn't a motivational speaker. She didn't do TikToks or interviews or live streams. She didn't rehearse lines for applause. But then she remembered Nia's letter, the teenage girl, who said she almost gave up her dream of joining the Army until she saw Serena. That alone was enough. So she said yes. The high school auditorium was packed. Rows of students in navy blue JROTC uniforms sat with straight backs and wide eyes. Teachers stood against the walls. Local veterans, community leaders, and even a few reporters filled the last 2 rows. Serena stepped onto the small stage wearing a tailored black blazer over her Army service blouse. Her medals were pinned to her chest, glinting softly under the overhead lights. She walked up to the podium, paused, and scanned the audience. Then she spotted her second-row middle seat, a girl with dark braids, firm shoulders, and a tiny American flag folded neatly in her lap. Serena's voice didn't waver as she spoke. "I was a lot like many of you when I joined," she began. "I had doubts, I had fear, but I also had a reason. I wanted to serve something bigger than myself." She told them about her deployments, the desert heat, the friendships, and the heartbreak. She told them about leadership and loneliness and what it meant to carry someone else's safety in your hands. Then she paused. "And then I came home, and I found that the fight wasn't always out there." The auditorium grew still. "Sometimes," she said, "the fight is right here against ignorance, against prejudice, against that quiet voice in someone's mind that says, you don't belong here." She looked again at the girl with the flag. "I had someone tell me I didn't belong in a first-class seat, and instead of raising my voice, I made a call. Not to retaliate, but to make it known I do belong. We belong, not because of the uniform, but because we are human. And that should have been enough." Applause broke out. After the speech, our students rushed to greet her. Some took photos, others asked questions about training or enlistment, and then the girl with the flag stepped forward. Her eyes shimmered. "I'm Nia," she whispered. Serena froze. "The Nia The girl nodded and handed her the flag. This was my brother's. He didn't make it back from Afghanistan. I didn't think I'd ever be brave enough to follow him. But I'm enlisting next summer, and I want you to have this for courage. Serena took the flag with both hands, speechless. She didn't cry, but she felt the tears well in her chest like thunderclouds. You keep this, she said, finally placing the flag gently back in Nia's hands. And when you earn your stripes, I'll be the one saluting you. That night, Serena drove home in silence. The folded flag still lived in her memory like a burning ember. Nia's words echoed through her for courage. She arrived back at her apartment to find another envelope in her mailbox. No name on the front. Just a clean white envelope with neat square handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Dear Sergeant Jackson, I was on your flight that day. I was sitting in row 4C. I saw everything, and I didn't say a word. I was afraid. Not of you, but of getting involved, of being wrong, of being loud. I should have stood up. I should have said something. I'm sorry. I've now joined a local initiative that teaches bystander training in corporate settings. We show people how to step in, how to support, how to dismantle bias quietly but effectively. You started something, Sergeant, and we're following. Serena stared at the letter for a long time. It wasn't just about her anymore. This was bigger than a seat, bigger than an airline. It was a reckoning, a shift, a movement. One born not from rage but from restraint. Not from noise but from quiet, unwavering dignity. She stood at her window looking out at the city lights blinking in a sea of glass towers and traffic. Somewhere out there, change was happening in conversations, classrooms, boardrooms, and maybe even in hearts. Because of a single moment, a single push, a single soldier. And now a wave of voices rising, not in chaos but in harmony. Serena closed her eyes and for the first time in a long time, she felt home. It was supposed to be a routine morning flight, Skybridge Airlines Flight 1072, en route from Charlotte to Chicago. Serena Jackson wasn't on board. In fact, she hadn't flown Skybridge since the day she was humiliated and vindicated all in the span of a few hours. But her name still traveled through the skies. This time it was the pilot who brought her up. Captain Marcus Lane, a tall black man with graying temples and a voice as calm as ocean waves, had read about Serena's story. He followed every update, including the disciplinary actions taken and the reforms Skybridge promised. But what really stayed with him was the quiet strength she carried even under public scrutiny. As he prepped the aircraft, a young flight attendant named Chloe, on only her third month with the airline, approached him nervously. Captain Lane, she said, I just wanted to let you know, we may have an issue. He raised an eyebrow. What kind of issue? She shifted on her feet. Passenger 3A. It's an Army Staff Sergeant, female, black, wearing full uniform. One of the senior attendants, Stacy. She already rolled her eyes and said, hope this one isn't another Serena Jackson. Captain Lane straightened. She said that in front of you. Chloe nodded. He paused for a moment, then simply said noted. The plane finished boarding. Passengers settled in. And in seat 3A sat Staff Sergeant Ayanna Fields, recently returned from Kuwait. Her posture was identical to Serena's that day, calm, proud, yet slightly alert. The uniform told her story before she ever spoke. Stacy, the senior flight attendant, with over 20 years on the job, made no effort to hide her disdain. She passed Ayanna without eye contact, handed her a plastic cup of water without a word, and loudly complimented the real VIPs in rows 1 and 2. Captain Lane watched from the cockpit entrance. When Stacy returned to the galley, he called her aside. Is there a reason you're ignoring a uniformed soldier, he asked. Stacy scoffed. I treat everyone equally. No, you don't, he said firmly. You treat people like they're a problem before they've spoken a word. She bristled. With respect, Captain, I've seen how this goes. They cause a scene and we end up with grounded flights and HR investigations. I'm just trying to do my job without another PR mess. Captain Lane narrowed his eyes. If your job is to insult veterans and disrespect passengers based on assumptions, you're in the wrong profession. She opened her mouth, but he cut her off. I'll be speaking to the passengers shortly. He returned to the cockpit and made a decision, an unusual one. After takeoff and reaching cruising altitude, he pressed the intercom button. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are cruising at 36,000 feet and expect smooth skies all the way to Chicago. But I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge someone special on board. The cabin went quiet. In seat 3A is Staff Sergeant Ayanna Fields returning home after serving our country overseas. Sergeant Fields, on behalf of this crew, this airline, And every American who understands the meaning of service, I want to say thank you." There was a beat of silence. Then applause broke out, genuine, sustained, respectful. Ayanna looked up surprised and nodded quietly. Her eyes misted just slightly. Stacy stood frozen in the galley, her face pale. After landing in Chicago, the crew disembarked as usual. But before leaving, Captain Lane handed Chloe an envelope. "Could you please give this to HQ," he said. "It's my official complaint against Stacy's conduct on this flight." Chloe looked at him. "Sir, won't this cause waves?" He smiled. "Good, maybe it'll cause a storm." Back at Skybridge HQ, the HR team was already stretched thin from implementing the new veteran sensitivity programs. Julia Manning, the same director who had once made the call to fire Amanda Keller, now reviewed Captain Lane's letter personally. It read, "We are a company learning in public. That means we don't just fix what's broken, we stay vigilant against the cracks that try to reform beneath the surface." One of those cracks just flew on Flight 1072. By the next day, Stacy was suspended pending a full investigation. Serena never knew any of this, but Ayanna did. She found Serena's email through a mutual contact and wrote, "Sergeant Jackson, you don't know me, but you protected me, not with a gun, not with a command, with your example. Because you stood your ground, I didn't have to today. Captain Lane called me out by name, not to humiliate me, but to honor me. He did what others should have done for you. You made that possible. Thank you for clearing the runway." Ayanna. Serena read the email from her couch, flag folded beside her, coffee untouched. She smiled faintly and whispered to herself, "One voice multiplies." It was late fall when Serena Jackson received a call from Skybridge Airlines, not from their PR team, not from legal, but from someone she never expected, Captain Marcus Lane himself. His voice was warm, calm, and carried the steady confidence only a veteran pilot could master. "Sergeant Jackson," he said, "I know you've probably heard enough from us to last a lifetime, but I'd like to speak with you. Not as a company man, just as a fellow professional who believes you deserve more than what happened." Serena was cautious but curious. "Go ahead." "I wanted to invite you to join us. Not for an apology, for something real. We're holding a forum for internal flight crew, mandatory, not optional. And we want you to speak. Not for sympathy, for truth." Serena hesitated. "I've seen what change looks like," Captain Lane added. "And it starts when the people who've been hurt the most are willing to stand in front of the system and say, 'This is what it felt like.'" A long pause. Then Serena agreed. A month later, she stood in the Skybridge Training Center in Atlanta, an entire auditorium filled with flight attendants, pilots, gate agents, and operations managers. The backdrop was a replica of an aircraft cabin. The mood was cautious but respectful. Captain Lane introduced her simply, "Most of you know her name. Now you'll hear her truth." Serena stepped up to the microphone. She wore a tailored dark green blazer, no medals, no fanfare. But her presence commanded the room. "I didn't want to be here," she said, opening with brutal honesty. "I didn't want to relive that day. I didn't want to see your uniforms again. But then I remembered why I wore mine for so many years, and it was to make hard things easier for the next person who walks in the room." There was a hush. I was pushed not just physically. I was pushed out of comfort, out of respect, out of a space I had earned. All because someone couldn't see past the color of my skin, or the camo on my uniform, or the history that follows both. She walked a few steps closer to the edge of the stage. "And when I didn't shout, when I didn't fight back, the world took notice. Not because I stayed quiet, but because I stood still. That's all I did. I held my seat." She let the words breathe. "Your job is about more than peanuts and seatbelts. It's about safety, dignity, and visibility. You see people for hours, sometimes the last face they see before landing, before deploying, before saying goodbye. That matters." Then she paused and added softly, "One day a young soldier might sit in your cabin. She may be scared. She may be proud. She may be broken. You won't know, but she'll remember how you treated her." A standing ovation followed, but Serena didn't bask in it. She walked off stage with calm purpose. Backstage, Captain Lane greeted her with a smile. That, he said, was exactly what we needed. Serena looked him in the eye. "Then make sure they do something with it." "I will," he said, "starting today." Later that afternoon, Serena walked past a row of framed photos in the Skybridge hallway, each one a portrait of someone the airline had honored for service pilots, retired cabin crew mechanics. Then she saw something new. At the end of the hall, a glass display held a folded American flag, an Army patch, and a plaque. It read, "In honor of Staff Sergeant Serena Jackson, for reminding us what courage looks like at 30,000 feet. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But she stood there for a long time. Not as a guest, not as a case study, but as a presence. 2 days later, Serena boarded a flight for the first time since the incident. She was flying commercial seated in economy this time, not out of humility, but because she wanted to observe. As she entered the cabin, the flight attendant at the front, young Latino, maybe early 20s, glanced at her uniform and smiled genuinely. "Welcome aboard, Staff Sergeant. Let me know if there's anything I can do." She nodded, "Thank you." As she made her way down the aisle, she noticed something small, almost invisible. Row 3A was empty. A laminated card was taped to the headrest. It read, "Reserved in silent honor of those who serve. This seat is never sold. This seat never forgets." Serena stopped, blinked, and took a quiet breath. She kept walking, found her seat, sat down. She didn't need that chair anymore, because now the entire airline was standing. The sun had just started to rise over Washington, D.C., casting a soft amber hue across the city's skyline. Serena Jackson stood alone at the reflecting pool, her military coat draped neatly over her shoulders, eyes locked on the towering figure of the Lincoln Memorial. She hadn't come here for ceremony or symbolism. She came for closure. The past months had pulled her into a whirlwind she never asked for. From a silent seat on a plane, to national headlines from anonymous apologies, to a reserved seat that would never be sold again. She had endured, and she had risen. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Captain Lane. "Today's the day. We'll be watching from every gate." She smiled faintly. Today, for the first time in Skybridge Airlines history, they were unveiling the Jackson Fellowship, a new veteran-to-cockpit scholarship named after her. It would fully sponsor 5 veterans each year through flight school training and pilot certification. But that wasn't the part that made Serena emotional. The part that did, she was one of them. 8 months earlier, after that now famous internal speech, Serena had received an offer from Skybridge's CEO directly. "If you ever want to fly, we'd be honored to help you earn your wings." At first she laughed. She thought he meant it symbolically. But the offer was real. And after years of being a passenger in a world she helped protect, Serena decided it was time to take control of the cockpit. She had completed flight ground school in record time. Simulators, exams, flight hours with a veteran mentor pilot who told her, "You were born for this, Jackson." And today she was co-piloting her first official flight from D.C. to Dallas. The airport buzzed with quiet pride. Her name wasn't on the boarding screen, no flashy announcement. But in the crew lounge, every pilot knew. In the terminal, veterans nodded when they saw her uniform. And at gate 17, a little girl held up a handmade sign that read, "Go Pilot Jackson." Serena walked calmly to the aircraft, headset in hand, flight bag slung over her shoulder. The captain she was flying with, an older woman named Celia, grinned as Serena stepped into the cockpit. "Ready to make history?" Celia asked. Serena smiled. "Let's make it routine." As she ran through her checklist, she felt the hum of the engines beneath her fingers and thought of every woman, every soldier, every voice that had stayed silent too long. Not anymore. At 32,000 feet, Serena leaned forward and made an announcement to the passengers. "Good morning, folks. This is First Officer Serena Jackson speaking from the flight deck. It's an honor to be guiding you home today." Simple, direct. But in row 3A, a Vietnam veteran wiped a tear. And in the galley, a young black flight attendant looked toward the cockpit and whispered, "Damn right it is." After landing, Serena walked through the terminal, not as a passenger, not as a symbol, but as a pilot. Confident, purposeful. At baggage claim, a man in a dark suit approached her. He was mid-50s, black tall, carried a cane, and on his chest a bronze star pin. "Sergeant Jackson?" he asked. She turned. "Yes, sir. I'm Colonel Evans, retired. You don't know me, but I know your name. What you did, it shifted something. It told the rest of us, young or old, we're not invisible anymore." Serena stood still. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a weathered flight patch. "My daughter wanted to be a pilot once," he said. "But after watching what happened to you, she signed up. She's in ground school now." He pressed the patch into Serena's hand. "You gave her back her sky." Serena looked at the patch. The stitching was frayed, but the eagle was clear. She tucked it into her jacket. "Thank you, Colonel," she said. "No," he replied. "Thank you, Captain." She didn't correct him. That evening, Serena returned home to a small apartment filled with plants, photos, and light. On her wall hung 2 frames. One held her military medals. The other held a boarding pass, seat 3A. Underneath it, in simple handwriting, "I held my seat, now I fly the plane." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the room in gold, Serena poured herself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the sky. Not as a boundary, but as a beginning. Because sometimes the most powerful way to fight, is to fly.